Yes, this morning we are joined by a very special guest. We have the leader of the ACT Party, David Seymour, joining us from Wellington. Talofa lava, David. Welcome to the Morning Shack.
Hey, talofa lava, and thanks for having me on the show.
Hey, David. Now, usually, when we're in a Pacific setting, if we have a lunch or if we have a meeting, usually we like to get our guests to introduce themselves, where their villages are from, where they whakapapa from. So, David, just tell us, introduce yourself and where you're from.
Yeah, hey, look, thanks. I was born in Palmerston North, and I just want to say there is actually stuff to do there, despite what the Spanish soccer team said. My dad's family's from there in the Manawatu. My mum's family's from up north. So when I was quite young, we moved to Whangarei, where my mum's family's from. And then as I grew up, I eventually drifted to Auckland, like a lot of people over the years. And for the last almost 30 years, I've been in Auckland, in Tamaki Makaurau there.
Yeah, beautiful. Now, David, it's no secret. You've caught a bit of heat, over some of the comments that you've made over the past week, and we're going to get into that a bit later. But firstly, you're here to the shack, and not a lot of our listeners here would really know you. So let's not beat around the bush. A lot of Pacific people, they're not really fans of you, and we thought here, maybe they just misunderstand who you are and who the ACT Party is about. And with the elections coming up, we want to get into the hard questions, the questions that Pacific people, our people here, would want to know. And so, David, firstly, food and family, very important to Pacific people. And if you're coming over for a tōna'i, which is a Samoan lunch, what are you bringing to lunch, David?
What am I bringing to lunch? I tell you what I'd probably bring is something I've done because I learned how to do it over in Canada, and that's what they call cedar plank salmon. They get a piece of cedar and then they put some salmon on top. But you've got to wet the cedar 24 hours beforehand. Oof. And then you put it on the barbecue, and the heat actually turns the cedar into smoke, so you actually get it smoked that way. And then sometimes put a bit of brown sugar on top of the salmon, because that just brings out a nice sort of caramel sort of flavour. So probably that's a bit of a go-to, something I picked up the time I lived over there for a few years.
So you're a bit of a fan of the brown sugar there, Dave?
Oh, mate, it's it's not just me, it's Mick Jagger, everyone loves it.
We all love us a little bit of brown sugar, my friend. Holy.
I think you've passed the kongai test. And so the next one is, if you were in trouble and you needed some protection, who was the Pacific person you'd hire as your security team?
Oh, definitely Sir Michael Jones. I worked with him a little bit on charter schools. He was in charge of Pacific Advanced Senior School. And I went to visit the school, and being me, I forgot my briefcase. And so I went back to my office, which was about 10 or 15 Ks away. And I got there and someone called. They're like, you forgot your briefcase, but Sir Michael will bring it to you. I'm like, no. We can deal. He doesn't need to do that. That's absolutely fine. Anyway, about half an hour later, I see this huge guy, and he's carrying what looked like the tiniest briefcase I've ever seen. And he brought it all the way back and brought it back to me. And I just thought, that guy's just an absolute legend. And working with him on charter schools was very, very cool.
David, are you a bit of a fan of the Chris Brown?
Look, mate, I got to tell you, when it comes to pop culture, I'm a seriously terminally uncool person on basically anything to do with music. Last time I listened to music.
Hey, mate, I seen you on Dancing with the Stars, bro. I know you got some rhythm, my brother.
If you've seen me on Dancing with the Stars, I don't got some rhythm. I think that's the main thing we found out.
Did you feel disrespected when Susie Cato got voted off before you, bro?
I almost felt like a duty to give up my place so that Susie could dance on. But hey, look, a lot of people texted in and voted for me, and we raised a lot of money for charity. So
that's the main thing. We've got David Seymour here from the ACT Party.
Yes, and speaking of disrespect, a lot of Pacific people feel a bit disrespected by the comment or or the joke that you said that you made, about the Guy Fawkes joke, in terms of bombing the Ministry of Pacific Peoples. Have you had some feedback from Pacific people within? You have, like Kamo Sepaloni, who has come out and said some things. Have you changed your stance on any apology or any of that?
No, I haven't. I'll give you some feedback I got just yesterday. Um, Proud of you and your team, David. Strong leadership. I'm one of many women and Samoans who detest condescending diversity appointments, so stay strong. New Zealand needs you and your team. So, you said something earlier about it's no secret about how Pacific people think. First of all, I actually just want to challenge you gently on that. I don't think all Pacific people think the same. There's a range of views. So there are Pacific people who agree with me and Pacific people who disagree with me. There are European New Zealanders who agree with me and some who disagree with me. That's normal.
Yeah.
So I'm quite keen to get away from, trying to put people in boxes. That's the first thing. I think we're all human. We're all got one shot at life and should make the most of it. Second thing about those comments, once you've taken that context, it was actually about government waste. It was about the Ministry of Pacific Peoples that wasted $40,000 on a farewell that hasn't delivered any useful outcomes for Pacific people or anyone for that matter, and a organisation that then gave away $121,000 of Prezi cards. Nobody really knows why. So I think we've got to separate criticising that department from criticising all Pacific people who, by the way you put it, would think the same. I think that's wrong. And I think the final thing we've got to recognise is that I talked about someone who's been dead for 400 years. I talked about someone who actually failed to blow anything up. And then I immediately after I said, by the way, I'm not even serious about that. So I think the fact that people have spent so long talking about it, and some people have tried to make it about race when it was actually about government waste, that's a shame. But you know what's great is it's given me the opportunity to have this conversation, because I make myself available for interviews, and I'm glad that now you're having me on so we can have this corridor. I think that's fantastic.
That's great. We can have this talanoa. You know what I mean? But you speak of splitting things. And the ACT Party is all around not dividing by race. Do you still feel that's a thing? Because we as Maori and Polynesian, we do feel that. That we're not there's no equality when it comes to the poverty line, for instance. Do you feel that that's a valid comment to be able to split everything, not be able to split by race?
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you just talked about. You talked about two different things. So you talked about poverty. You talked about disadvantage. I'd add education. I'd add housing. There's some real problems in New Zealand, and I want to solve those problems. But actually, if you think about it, there are people who are Pacific, people who are Maori, people who are not Pacific or Maori,
right,
who have those problems.
Awesome.
And so I'm interested in solving the problems for all people. If you do that effectively, then you don't have to worry about the race stuff. If you focus on race, what happens is you miss people who actually are doing well and don't need the help. And you also miss people who are disadvantaged but don't get helped because you're doing everything by race.
It's Mareko Stop, Drop and Roll. You're a big fan of just out there. Early in the morning, we all good to stop, drop and roll there, David?
That song, now this is from when I was a bit less uncool.
Yeah.
I loved that song, but I must have been 14 when that came out. I mean, it shows how we're getting old, because that song must be at least 20 years old.
Were you at the Jump Jam? Were you in the front line when it came to Jump Jam there, Dave? No?
The last time I did Jump Jam was actually about 5 years ago at Otago Girls High. They got me down.
We need to get you in here.
I wasn't very fit. I just about died.
Hey, David, it's just some tips on if you need a campaign song, I reckon you should get the Decepticons to help you out there.
Yeah, maybe Swidit might be able to come through,
Hey, so I just wanted to talk about, and I agree with you, not all Pacific people think the same, and, there are some who do support your party. But, in terms of that, I noticed you don't have any Pacific people, or maybe you do, correct me if I'm wrong, on your team, but you seem to feel like you have the answers for Pacific problems. And a lot of the issues that we have is, for us as Pacific people, Māori people, is for, the white man speaking for us and trying to solve our problems for us and not with us. So can you talk a little bit about, how are you going to help, solve Pacific problems when you're not Pacific, David?
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, first of all, we don't have any candidates of Pacific heritage. We've got quite a few Maori candidates. And I think that's a shame. I'm actually hopeful that doing more interviews like this, broadening our connections with the Pacific community beyond those. And we have a number of, friends who are part of the ACT Party in different ways who are Pacific, but they're not standing as candidates. That's true, and we need to keep building that connection. So who knows? Maybe there's someone listening to this interview now that wants to get involved, and that would be great.
Well, 100%, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You're opening the door. So if there's any Pacific people out there, you might want to run for the ACT Party. Mr. David Seymour, he's opening his door right now.
Yeah.
He needs you on his team.
And we mean that genuinely.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I'd say is that our party's grown a lot. I mean, it used to have one person in Parliament. Now it's got 10. If you look at the poll on Monday, that says we would have 17. So it's going to keep growing, and more people are going to come in. And so hopefully that will mean more Pacific people. Your second question about, having this solution, I think the policies of ACT are more about letting communities decide. I don't know the answer to everything in every community. I'm very honest about that. I don't pretend to. What I do know is that there are some basic laws treating everyone equally, not discriminating on race, giving people choices, being responsible for the things you do. It's those really basic laws that actually work. And so if you look at charter schools, to come back to that again, I mean, I didn't know that Seta Salupe needed to set up Rise Up Academy in South Auckland. I didn't know how to run her school. I didn't know why her school should run. But she knew. And so all I did was say, look, we're not going to make the Ministry of Education run every school, because that is white people speaking. That is white saviors coming in, like all the ones that have ridden in over this joke about Guy Fawkes.
Yeah.
What we did was we said, actually, we're going to let communities set up their schools and do it their way, because they know more about their community than we do. So that's my general style, is let people have more choices so long as there's responsibility with it.
Do you think I'm just going to call it as is, with Pasifika and Māori and communities that we live in, do you think that ACT does enough for them?
Yeah, I think we do. I mean, we stand up for the basic idea that, first of all, you should be safe. I mean, the problem with crime is that if you look at, and people don't talk about this enough, if you look at the Ministry of Justice's victimization survey, Maori are far more likely to be victims of crime than anyone else. So if you want to start, putting people into racial groups, the fact that ACT is the party that says we need to start putting victims first, offenders second, we need to be prepared to lock people up if they're offending, not have people out on home and community detention continuing to offend every day. And it's several offences, 4 or 5 offences a day by people on home D, including domestic violence. We've got to start dealing with these kinds of issues.
Sorry to interrupt you, David.
And so that's an example of where we're helping.
So sorry to interrupt. But do you believe that sometimes crime is just a byproduct of poverty? Because we're the marginalized, we're the minority really, and we don't get the lion's share of whatever it is because of trying to not be not diverse, as you say, not diversify from race that you guys are putting out there.
Well, let me just deal with that first thing you said. Is crime a byproduct of poverty? I think there's a relationship, but I think it's wrong to say that poverty is an excuse for crime. I think when people commit a crime, they are responsible for the crime. That's the first thing. The second thing is I think poverty is a real problem, and ACT has very good policies that would deal with it. For example, we believe that the biggest problem in the last 30 years or so, it's got so much harder to buy a house. It's got so much harder to build a house. It's got so much harder to pay rent. And so if you go through our policies around resource management, around infrastructure funding, around building consents, those policies would make it easier to build a home, because the biggest problem that people who are poor, no matter what racial background they're from, biggest problem they have is it's too hard to afford housing. And
100%.
That's one thing where we have very strong policies.
Thank you so much, David. I'm really sorry to cut you off there. That's
you.
all we have time for,
right.
but we just really appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you here on the Shack later. We've got a segment called 4-Bar. We need to get you on the 4-Bar segment. Come do some rapping.
Okay. You probably won't have me on more than once as a rapper, but please have me on again to talk about what we've talked about.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, David.